Good day, dear students. Today we are starting yet another short story, and that too by an Indian writer in English, and that is Arun Joshi. We need to know a little bit about the author, that is Arun Joshi, and the best thing about him is that he was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and Bhagavad Gita, and Albert Camus and existentialism inspired his writings. So all these can be seen in his writings also. The first novel, or The Foreigner, was his debut novel, which was published in the year 1968. And you find a number of novels, all better than the other. The Strange Case of Billy, which was The Apprentice, The Last Labyrinth, The City and the River. These are some of the works of Arun Joshi. You will find in his writings the question of existentialism, and that seems to define his writings. There is always a foreigner or outsider, or his protagonist feels that they are foreigners. Foreigner in the sense that they do not belong there, or even outsiders. You can use whichever term is better for you. And they had all gone through existential dilemmas. The question as to what is the purpose of my life, and whether this is indeed life or not. So these questions trouble the mind of the protagonist of his writings. The short story that you have to learn is you have to read is The Homecoming, and you find that the protagonists of his novels as well as short stories, they try to make a rapport with the world so that they can live with the others, their family and their friends and the others. The short story, The Homecoming, is the return of a young Indian lieutenant after the war. The war that he mentions here is the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971. I'm sure that you were not born at that time because it belongs to our age. And I still remember the headlines and the war and the narration of the war, everything. And sitting from the home in Kerala, we can only read about the war, and there was not even television at that time to see what is happening there, or even the snatches of the war. So here you find that you need to know more about the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, and you will find it in detail in your text itself. Just before the story begins, you have an extremely detailed account of the Bangladesh Liberation War, and this is the time when Bangladesh became Bangladesh, because earlier it was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and there was much clash, and now you find that it is the country called Bangladesh, and India supported them. So that was the war. But here you are having one person who was a lieutenant in the army, who had been to the war front, and the name of that person is not mentioned because Arun Joshi, the writer, feels that the name just doesn't matter. So here you find that when you read the story, of course the name just do not matter, and you will find in the story not a single name, either for the sister, fiancé, mother, father, or even friends, the poet and the other friends. Lots of friends are there, and even a Subedar is mentioned, but even his name is not mentioned there. So Arun Joshi is here really creating a situation which can be placed anywhere, and it will look the same, or it is almost the same with people who had been in harrowing situation. The name of the protagonist here is not mentioned, so we don't have the name but only the lieutenant. So he returns from the horrors of war, and it was his first war experience. Perfect war, or the first war experience, where he is to take the leadership and command and face the war and everything. That was indeed a shock for him. And he had seen people killing his men, and he himself had killed a lot of enemies. That's how a war goes. So when he returns, after that the war and the horrors and the cries and the corpses, everything, it is just a relief to be away from there, but that still remains in his mind. And so when he returns to civilization, let me call it as civilization, or the so-called civilized or ordinary life, that ordinary life we'll call that, he feels alienated, and he was welcomed by his eager fiancée and his happy family. Fiancée, the girl he had been betrothed to, and his family, they all welcomed him happily because they're happy that he is alive and he is there for them to see. And while he is returning from the railway station, his fiancée talked of blackouts and the air raids and the TV news about the war. They used to listen to that, and they had to suffer the blackouts and the air raids. But and his mother, and she also spoke about dieting because they had been restricted to the house for a long time, and she had put on weight. She feels so she thinks of going or undergoing a diet program. Immediately, the mother-in-law, that is his mother or mother-in-law to be, his mother speaks that dieting can cause anemia, and she said it's not good for good if you are going to have a child. So in a way, the people are talking normally, and one is talking about dieting. The lieutenant at that time was thinking of the long line of people who were hungry during the wartime, people whom they had saved from the enemies, and how they waited for food. And whenever they got food, they gobbled up the food within no time at all. They was that hungry. They can't think of dieting or even anemia or anything. It was just a surviving. And so they waited for food, and when it came, they ate as quick as possible. The old people of that line, they did not bother about food because they are so down and so weak. And sometimes they had food, sometimes, most often they didn't. They just died because they didn't eat. That is the main reason. And here, the fiancé and his mother, they are talking of dieting, food, and anemia. And he can't think of any of those things, but only of hunger, the hunger of those people, and how they waited for food. And when it came, and if it came, that again is a cross day. And when you are on the war front, you have to be prepared for that. People come for the to that level, and these refugees waited for food, and before they could or any country could establish refugee camps. I still remember the refugee camps that have been put up and the time it took. All this takes a little bit more time, and so naturally several people died due to hunger. So this man, this Latin, had been a witness to all this, and no wonder he feels alienated. He feels like a foreigner among these ordinary people, people who lead ordinary life. He is now back to his ordinary life, but still the hangover from the war is still with him. So Arun Joshi puts the present of the lieutenant alongside his war experience. The mother and his fiancée, the mother is trying to arrange his marriage, and in his mind's eye, he could see only the charred, bloated, short-hacked corpses. He goes about the daily routine and for socializing, but half the time he was still in the battlefield because his memories are still fresh. So here you find a man being there in the present, but still unable to drag himself from his past. A past that is so sorrowful, so shocking, that he had not yet recovered from the war, the shock of the war, even though he was trained to be a lieutenant. If you are to be a lieutenant, not just an ordinary soldier, then you have to undergo several trainings and war experience. And now there is a war, a serious enough war. And even then, and maybe because of that shock, it is still there. So he just can't be with these ordinary situations. But somehow or other, he maintains the ordinary attitude. He answers their questions, mingles with them. But half the time, his memories are still with him and they are still so fresh. So his sister takes him to a party. His sister had started wearing goggles because that was supposed to be fashionable. She drinks and smokes. These are things that the young people did in these days. The young people were wearing goggles and they can talk and build things up. They are very good at it, talking. The young people very calmly spend their time talking and talking and building up things, and they can really do that. They can really talk well and just talking. So this man who had been on that war front, where he had seen action, he had been in action, finds this talking and building up certain things, and maybe this is so, maybe this is that, that kind of supposing and talking, and that finds so irritating maybe, but he just do not show that because he's Arun Joshi, the author, is not telling us that he is getting irritated. But maybe if we are in the same place, we feel irritated. But this man is very calm as a trained lieutenant of the army and just did not show any emotion, even irritation. He just listened to it and assess their talking and understands that they are very good at talking and talking. Okay. There was even a poet who harped on genocide because the killing of a certain type of certain group of people uh, amounts to genocide. And this is exactly what happens on, and he also talks in these parties. And these young people talk of the things they had read in newspapers and magazines, while this lieutenant, who had experienced war, listened. And he listened to the poet glorifying war through his lines. But he, the lieutenant, remembered. He remembered how 6 boys in a boat tried to escape the war front. The eldest was only 19, which means that the others were much younger. They really wanted to escape on a boat, but he knew that they are not going to reach safety. They can't stop them. And he could still remember their faces, the fear on their faces, and how they just set out on a boat. He remembered a school full of girls that had been the brothel for a battalion. A school full of girls, and that was the brothel for a battalion of soldiers. And a battalion was 1,000 men, he told them. While these people, youngsters, were talking and discussing the newspapers that they have read, the magazines that they have read about the war. And if it is today's condition, they would be discussing whatever that came in the TV news channels. This was the same thing in those earlier days when we didn't have the TV. But they could really discuss. But he had experienced war, so he listened to them. He listened to the poet glorifying war through his lines, and he did not feel much about it. You can glorify war when you are not there in the battlefield, and there is nothing to be glorified. And the harrowing experience, as I told you earlier, of the war really had struck this lieutenant, and he told them of his war experience and about these young boys who tried to save themselves, the school full of girls which had been turned to a brothel for a battalion, and that battalion was 1,000 men. So you can imagine the experience of they and the soldiers being totally helpless in such a situation, except that they have to go fight the war and drive the enemy, and only then they could save all these people. And that was their mission. And this man was there in the action, the thick of the action, while these young people smoked and drank and spoke and did nothing. They just discussed the questions, the news that came in the newspaper and the magazine. Mind you, there was no TV, and I'm emphasizing that fact because it was in the 1971, and naturally it was not there in India at that time. So you have to get the news from the newspapers, and people read the newspapers avidly because they need to discuss it when they have company. And these youngsters, they just spend their time lazing about. And this lieutenant can't smoke because he had inhaled a lot of sulfur, and his doctors had advised him to not to smoke because he had to purge the sulfur from his lungs and clear it, and only then he'll be better. So he just can't smoke. But the others, these people smoked and drank and did whatever they want because they have a lot of time. So one day he came to know that he had been awarded Veer Chakra. This is indeed a great honor for any soldier, one who had played or one who had acted or one who had really been in action and saved a lot of people and had led his army to victory. But he remembered other deserving soldiers like the Subedar. But he can't say anything about it. It was something that was given to him by a lot of other people. Sit together, they just check the actions and what were that their glory that they brought to the motherland, and this is the way the country pays its tribute to its army men. And he was awarded Veer Chakra. But even then he was not happy, or he did not have anything to be happy of that. He remembered other deserving soldiers, like the Subeda, and he just remembered how the Subeda had the family and young girls or young children, and how they will be able to lead a life, whether they will have education or not. All these troubled his mind, and so at night he couldn't sleep because of the of remembering the terrors of the time, and also the trauma was really acting on him, and remembering these at night he just couldn't sleep. So in the morning, when he gets up, it is not as a refreshed person. The sleep was troubled. He just couldn't sleep because the trauma was too much. He just had to escape or to recover from that. And that recovering time is spent on parties and movies and dancing and the flowers in the garden. He just do not feel like even looking at these flowers so very fresh in the garden. A garden with flowers actually should be a great delight to any troubled mind. But he just cannot focus his attention on them because the mind is now full with the shock of the war, and that is still hanging on. And so he just couldn't escape the experiences of war. So he tried a lot of things like getting up early in the morning, going on with his routine, and then attending parties, movies, and dancing, more like a Western world because that is how they lived. And of course, in his house, there's a beautiful garden and the flowers. The author tries to mention the flowers in the garden, and in spite of everything, he just do not know how to fit in, how to be one of them, because the war had really alienated him. He knew now that he will never be one with them because his experience is something that they have not experienced. He can talk to them about his experience, but they may understand but they will listen to it as the story that was like a nightmare being told to them, and it is the life experience that makes him a foreigner, an outsider. So he will never be one with them. So he did not know how to fit in. He just do not know, though he is doing everything in a monotonous manner and maybe like a zombie. He is just doing it. Everything is being done one after the other. But he knew quite well that he just do not fit in that particular uh, group or even in the ordinary life. Maybe this is what happens to all the soldiers who had been through the trauma, and the psychology behind it is totally different. But Arun Joshi here is trying to tell us this story of this one lieutenant, and he is careful not to mention any names because it will deviate you from the main character, main protagonist, the lieutenant, and the story will not be that intense. So here the intensity of the experiences of the lieutenant is clearly transmitted to the readers through the lines of the author. And he also comes to the conclusion that this soldier is not ever going to fit in the society or even in the ordinary life ever, because that had been his war experience. The traumatic condition of the war experience had really made him a different person, a totally different person, a person who just cannot enjoy or even take for granted the life of these ordinary people, youngsters, drinking and smoking and partying, dancing and movies. To them, they don't have anything to do, so they are doing it. But even then, he will be a separate person, an outsider. So this is being emphasized through the short story by Arun Joshi. So here you find the skill of the short story writer and how he is portraying or bringing to the readers the mindset or the mind frame of a lieutenant or an army man, and this is conveyed effectively and beautifully also. So, dear students, read through the story, experience yourself the experiences of the lieutenant. You'll find a lot of experiences, more experiences are mentioned. I have not added them to the slides, it is there in the text. It's a beautiful short story. Do read it and enjoy it. And we'll see again with the next class. Okay, thank you.